We are committed to creating a safe and supportive space for our guests and listeners, and to provide information and tools that will help our listeners understand, manage, and overcome trauma. We understand that the healing journey can bring up challenging emotions. Therefore, we want to warn our audience that certain episodes may contain discussions or stories that could be triggering for some individuals. The content of the podcast is for educational and informative purposes only, and we encourage you to practice self-care and discretion while listening, and to reach out to a trusted support system or professional if you feel overwhelmed and need help on your healing journey.
Because we already talked about stories that we create and then challenging them. And I thought we were going to talk about changing our story.
It sounds good to me, and it also makes sense kind of as a next step to discuss.
Yeah.
So how do you, let's say, or maybe you can start with an example from your own life when you might have one is identifying the story, right? Like you have actually identified it. Then you might have started to challenge. And what happened from challenging to that story actually changing?
Yeah, let me think of it. Can you think of an example? Because I was thinking about this earlier. I'm like,
I think for me, one of them was
like a good one. Because there's so many, but it's like one that is a
I
game
feel like for me,
changer.
one has been game changer. That depends. For me, one of them was that I'm bad at people, or I'm boring.
Oh, ooh.
You know.
Well, I mean, we can go to the great extent of, me believing that no one loves me and no one likes me.
Yeah.
And we talked about that and what that did and how I went into every single relationship with that belief. No matter who they were. It could be a coworker, it could be someone stranger on the street, it could be a loved one, it didn't matter. That belief was just my belief. And I believed it so wholeheartedly for so long. And what made me begin to challenge it, I think we already talked about too, but there's people that like me. I mean, there's people that want to hang out with me. I was starting to look at the evidence. Instead of looking at just the evidence that I had done for so long, which was the evidence that people don't like me, which was really easy to find. I started looking for the evidence of no, people actually do like me. They, people don't want to hang out with me just, for no reason.
Yeah.
And then once that changed and I decided to change that story, when I really in my heart really believe that people do like me and love me, not everybody, and I don't expect that. That's not what I expect. I at least wanted one or two people to like me. So the fact that there was a good handful of people that really liked me, that were showing that they liked me, I started to have to question my belief. And so I did. And a part of that, it was my healing as well. There was other contributing factors, but certainly me recognizing it, challenging the lie, and then making a decision that I guess just really in my heart understanding that I am liked. I'm not going to be liked by everybody, and that's okay. I'm not in that desperate place anymore of,
But
I
you
gotta
maybe
find
also didn't
somebody.
start with assumption that you're not liked.
Correct. I went in with a full-on belief because the minute I was told that message, that sentence, I just 100% believed it. I didn't question it for a minute. Instead of questioning it, I went into feeling so sad that, wow, I had no idea. And what do I do with that? What do I do with that? I'm 11 years old. Nobody likes me.
So even like with the questioning, so you started to question it, which is that pretty much like that idea of like starting to challenge it. But was there something that you actually did, so many like action steps, or even like with the healing, something specifically that you did that helped you to start to move towards that story changing?
Well, I had to have self-awareness. And what I had to do is I had to really pay attention to my feelings and my body and how it was reacting. Because my body was telling me without me realizing it for so long, my body was telling me slow down, pay attention, look into this, question this. I mean, it was giving me indicators, but I had shut that down. And so that's what I started doing is I started, as the thoughts were coming into my mind, because as we all know, the thoughts just come pouring in and we don't even pay attention a lot of times. That's what kind of caught my attention. And I don't like not being liked. That doesn't feel good. That sucks, frankly. And so, and I'm not saying it wasn't hard and it wasn't painful and it wasn't scary, because I was
Yeah.
so worried that I might find out that, that lie that I was believing is actually truth, right? There's always that little thing in you, that little check in you, like, oh, this could end up being true. And then what do you do with that?
So
But
how was that? Because I feel like so many of us, we have these stories that they aren't helpful or healthy, but they are true. And then even the thought of there was like a documentary that I watched about somebody helping with, I don't remember what exactly they did, but they helped people to get rid of chronic pain. And so many
mm-hmm.
of them, they were so afraid to be pain free because they didn't know pretty much who they were without
Yeah,
it.
it becomes their identity.
Exactly.
Absolutely. That's very
So
common.
even like
Mm-hmm.
with that, I feel like there's a big internal resistance that can,
Mm-hmm.
even if you know that this will actually help me, this will improve me, but there's still something internally that is trying to hold you back, because that pain, and it can be any kind of pain, it doesn't have to be just physical. That is what you know. That is what is familiar. And
Mm.
with even like with this example, what was that like familiar in it that you might uh feel that you would be struggling to maybe let go, or even like it would be hard to imagine your life without it?
Yeah, for me, it was what I mentioned earlier, and it might not be the same for everybody else. I know where you're going with this because I've seen that side of it, but for me, it really was, um, I was tired of the pain. Like that was my motivating factor from the age of 19, is I hated the pain and I wanted to get away from it. But there's also the fear of that little bit of fear of it could be true. It could be true. And facing that, to me, how do you face that? What if it is true? What if nobody liked me? How do I
Mm.
face that? Why am I here? I mean, then you go down a whole different road, which for all of us, I'm going to say, you are liked and you are loved, even if you don't feel like it, and you have value and you have a reason to be here. So, because I went down that dark road. For others, that's a really good question, because there are people that I have seen in my coaching and stuff where they're stuck in that victim mode and they don't want to get out. They absolutely resist it at all costs. And
I think they do. I think part
well,
of
they
them
do.
wants,
It's an absolute mindset for them.
yeah, like part of them wants and part of them don't. Like for me, that was with
Yeah.
like emotional eating and getting in shape. For me, that
Yeah.
felt impossible to like be in charge of pretty much like what I'm eating or not have like emotional eating.
Right.
And even though I was like, I really want it. I want to be strong. I want to be in like best shape and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. But part of me was like, no, I actually don't want it. Because like if I'm in shape, I get attention. And
Yeah.
I might actually, because one of the beliefs that I had, and I'm kind of still working through probably, is that I'm unlovable. What if I actually now get
Mm,
people showing attention, showing love? And because I naturally I would get more attention. So I was like, okay,
right.
if I'm staying here, I'm kind of comfortable. And then people
Yeah.
don't point things out, they don't like see me, which is one of the things that like I didn't want to be seen.
A wallflower?
Yeah, like it's and that's the thing where like I think it's important to identify that there can be sometimes when we think that we really want the change, we might want it, but there also might be part of us that doesn't want it. And trying to understand that as well and acknowledge that, because
Mm-hmm.
for me it was like, and I was getting confused. I'm like, why am I not getting changed? But there was something inside of me that was fighting, literally fighting against that change, and just being like, listen, let's just stay here. This is safe. This is what you know. And like, let's just stay here. Even though there might be like some suffering, pain, whatever with that, but like we know this. We know this. We got like, um, And that's where I think, because I would have conversations with people where they tell like, I really want to change. And you might want to change, but there still might be part of you that doesn't want to change. And that is playing some kind of role as well. There might be some protection or something.
Well,
That
at least with if you go into doing the same thing over and over, you kind of know what to expect. And you're
Yeah.
kind of in control, really, because you're making
Certainty.
that choice to go right down that same road, knowing really what the outcome is, right?
Yeah. And you
And
don't have to
so,
face the fears, you don't have to face the discomfort that might come
right,
with that, or some
right,
truths about yourself.
right, right, exactly,
Responsibility.
right.
So
And
yeah.
then you know, and one of the fears I think is true, and this is again with coaching with people that some people deal with, is thinking that they're a much worse person, or the situation or their life is much worse than it really is. You know, it's their perception. I'm not saying it's not bad, but I'm saying their perception, because our mind is going to take us to a place of everything's really dark when we go down that road. And so I
Yeah.
think for some people, they're afraid to face their reality, because they have their reality as they're such terrible, awful people, and they've done this terrible stuff, and there's no way you can come out of it and come back from it and fix it. And that's not true. And we've said this before, but as these thoughts are only in your head, they're going to be really big, and they're not going to be accurate. They're not. As soon as you vocalize them or you write them out and you look at it that way, you're going to see it's going to start kind of catching your attention, going, wait a minute, this kind of sounds crazy. Because I mean, have you ever had that experience where you've had something in your head and it's really bothering you and it feels really big,
All the time.
and you finally say to somebody, I got to talk about this. This is just crazy. And you say it, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, that really isn't that bad. And you kind of figure it out as you talk. Because a lot of times for me, as I talk it out, I figure it out.
But what if you don't have anybody to talk it out with?
You talk to yourself. And I am not kidding when I say that. I have literally done that. I do that myself. Being a loner for so many years, and not feeling like I had a safe place. I was my own kind of safe place. I talk to myself a lot out loud. I mean, it sounds silly, but it helps me kind of process my thoughts sometimes. I have to be careful what how I do it, of course, because if you start going down a negative road, there's nobody to get you out of it.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge with that, because I would do something similar, and I'm seeing more and more how important it is to have. It's a challenge to have that external feedback when you feel like you can't trust anybody. You have to be by
Yeah.
yourself. Nobody can. And I was actually talking to like a lady yesterday that I met, and I was telling her how like I realized I didn't have a concept of friendship or healthy concept. My
Right.
concept was I have to be there for them. I have to support them. I can't have any problems. If I have any problems, they have to be solved in isolation by myself. Then I have to come back and be strong again. And my problems don't matter. Their problems matter. I just have to be there.
Right.
That's the only thing that I'm there for as a friend. Um, and she was telling me like that sounds exhausting.
It is exhausting. It is exhausting. How nobody can keep that up.
And I was like, yeah, but that's all I knew, you know?
I know. I get that. And I
And
can relate to that to a
yeah,
degree.
and even like when it comes to change, when it comes to internal change or changing your story, when it comes to, or it's related just to you, it's a bit different than when it comes to interacting with others as well. Because now that I have a friend who is like showing me what a real friendship is, I'm like, to some extent, initially it's like kind of uncomfortable, especially with like giving and taking. I'm just like,
Yeah.
if she gives me, I feel like I have to kind of give back or give
Reciprocate.
like
Yeah.
double.
Right. I totally get that. I totally, because I'm
Um,
kind of going through the same thing of learning how to be a friend. And I mean, it's simple things like, this is one of the things this clicked with me recently, because I'm making a lot. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you,
no,
or
go ahead.
but it just kind of clicked that, you know, I'm actually reaching out to people. I'm actually reaching out to my friends because I didn't, and it's not because I didn't want to be with them because of that lie that I believed. And now I'm actually reaching out to them, and the response I'm getting is giving me the truth, which is they get excited. They want to meet with me, go have coffee. We have a great time. We catch up. And so, but I'm making the effort, and I'm sticking my neck out there because what if they say no? But, I'm at a place now, if they say no, it's for, it's for a reason. And it's probably not because they don't want to be around me. It's probably not that.
Yeah. And I feel like even the more we work on ourselves and the more security we have in ourselves, that even if the reason they don't want to meet with you is you're fine with that, and you can deal with that. You have that more, that like kind of confidence within yourself, and even like not taking it personally as well. But it's really interesting how even like with friendships themselves, you can't change that story unless you are actually changing your interactions with others. And that's
Yeah.
where I feel that's a big part of changing any kind of story. You have to actually change something. Like
You have to take action. You do have to take
exactly.
action. You really do. And it could be a small step, but you do have to
Yeah.
take action.
It can start like really small, and also along the way, which is something that I haven't been the best at, to celebrate your wins, even if they are small wins, but to actually celebrate them. Because
You don't
like
think so?
no, like I think it's beneficial, but I
Oh,
haven't been
yes,
like
yes.
that good at doing it myself, you
Mm,
know.
yeah.
But for me, like even initially, and I think this is something where so many people can get stuck, myself including, especially like some years ago, where you feel like you're trying everything. But if you look at it, you're not taking actions. You might be reading books, which can be helpful, but if nothing gets applied or nothing gets actually like acted on, then that information is just, I kind of call it feel good productivity. You're reading stuff, you're starting to feel good about understanding it, but you're not necessarily doing the real uncomfortable part of like putting it in practice. And for me, that's what I did for years, like like quite a while.
Yeah.
And I would be reading all the books, and I would literally like I would get really stuck, and it's years stacking up, and I'm just like, I'm reading things, I'm starting to understand them better, but nothing is changing. And I would literally,
Mm.
this is an example of how blind we are. And I would literally be like, why is nothing changing in my life? I'm consuming all this information, and I'm like, I'm starting to understand. And if I would take action, it would be like really small, really short amount of time. So it's not the smallness, it's the length of time. So if I would take action, it would be like just kind of, which is helpful initially. I would just like do it, but then kind of do nothing.
Back off. Yeah, back
Yeah, just
off.
like back
Yeah.
off. And I'm
Instead of
like,
taking
I
another
tried
little step.
everything,
Yeah. Instead of taking another little step and another little step. Yeah.
Yeah, which it's part of the process. So initially that might be the case with somebody listening, that
Yep.
even if you take that initial step and then you back off for like months, you still took a step, and now you can work towards kind of every time having that gap between taking action smaller and smaller. But that's what I did for a really long time. I would just like try it out, and I'm like, oh, that doesn't work. And I would just kind of try it out to identify what's not working, where I actually didn't take enough steps or like long enough to see what actually is or isn't working. And that's something that I would be in that space for years. And the longer you do this, the more frustrated you get. Because I just
Yeah.
couldn't understand. I'm like, I'm trying this, I'm learning from this person, and I'm like, I would take some sporadic action and then I stop. And I would be like really frustrated. And I would like just get kind of, to some extent, like I wasn't fully giving up on myself, but I was starting to become really miserable. Because I was
Yeah.
like, and I would see other people who are not even trying that hard or like learning as much, they just go and make it happen. And I was like,
Yep.
pretty much. And then you
Oh,
can
yeah.
get to a point when you're like, what is wrong with me?
Yeah. Yeah.
But sometimes it can be as simple as you might not just be taking the action, or the actions that I would be taking, they would still be so comfortable, or really like
Mm-hmm.
they weren't that uncomfortable for me to face. And that's why that those initial years, in like 7 years or so, I probably had less progress than I had in the last year, which that in
Mm-hmm.
itself, I want to point out that the change isn't linear. The beginning is the hardest because you're starting to do something new, and then you kind of suck at it. Then you have another thing to do that you kind of suck at that, and you just suck at a lot of things. And then once the key is to keep kind of trying and keep doing until something will click, and then you get like whatever you would have in like 5-7 years, now you get it in like 3 years,
Mm-hmm.
even more progress.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that also I want listeners to keep in mind, that the level of hardness that was to get to where you are now in the last 5 years, it might not actually be the same in the next 5 years. It doesn't mean that it will
Right.
be the equal, you're
Right.
building
Right.
momentum.
Right. Right. I know. And I've heard this example a few times and I really like it. It's like, we didn't learn how to drive a car by just reading a book. You have to get in the car. Like, I could read a book and I could know exactly how to get in my car and exactly what to do step by step. But if I don't get in my car and do it, I'm not driving.
And you know what I'm thinking about is, a lot of times we even might know what is it that we need to do, or we might even
True.
have that kind of instinct of, oh, I need to do this or that, but there's something that is holding us back from doing it. Let's say I have kind of my own like kind of idea about it, but from your perspective or your experiences, what were some of the things that kind of help you to actually start to take those steps that maybe initially you knew that you had to take?
Well, I got sick and tired of being sick and tired. So that was a motivating factor for me. And, first it was not wanting to try stuff because I was so afraid that I would fail. But for me, the shame went so deep that, and part of my abuse was every time I did something, I got ridiculed, right? Whether I did it right or wrong. And so I had to kind of break out of that. And there was just, for a long time, there was this deep fear that as soon as I mess up, everybody's just going to have a heyday with me. They're just going to have fun making fun of me. And, as I began to heal, and I guess part of my belief system in that too is still believing that the abuse was somewhat my fault, or I had some responsibility in it, that there's maybe something I could have done. And I guess, coming to the point of really understanding too that the abuse really wasn't my fault, kind of released a lot. Well, first of all, it released a lot of shame, a lot
Yeah.
of shame. I mean, I would say probably a good 80% of my shame was gone as soon as I truly, truly realized that the abuse was them and not me. And it wasn't, they were abusing me because I was just a piece of crap. Because that's what I used to think, that's what I was born for. I was born to be their punching bag. And the reality was, no, they were all hurting themselves. And so that helped me remove that shame and get the confidence to say, you know what? I'm not going to get this right, and I'm just going to screw up. And if people make fun of me, they're going to make fun of me no matter what, right? There's people out there that are going to do it, and I don't care. Yeah, when I first started this podcast, I'd never done a podcast. I had no idea.
Mm.
You and I worked
Yeah.
on putting it together. I'm changing it. I'm improving it. And, the Lisa that was unhealed in that old place would have never done this. No way. I'm telling stories on here that I hadn't even shared with my husband, and I'm putting it out there for the world.
And that's coming from a person who at one point believed that, or like you just had no voice.
Oh, my voice literally got stuck in my throat, literally. Literally. Yeah, it
And
was
anybody
weird.
listening, like this in itself is an example of how much you can change. Like,
Yeah.
I know that some of the people listening might have that thought, yeah, but for me it's different. Um,
And I used to
And
think that too.
exactly, I was about to say that. And about certain things, I probably still think that.
It still pops up. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Um, and I would invite you to challenge that, you know, because all of us, we are human. There's nothing more special about me or you than anybody listening. It's really, a lot of times it comes down to what is it that we do or decide to do, or some action steps we decide to take, and also how long we decide to take them. Because that's a good example is when and I would have some people in I think a good example was like in university. So I got the first degree and I was studying in English, which is my second language, and statistics. So statistics is pretty much learning completely new language, because
Oh
in my
yeah.
language, Latvian, the math is different than
Hmm.
English. And I got first degree. I actually had the and that class, because it was like psychology class. Nobody goes to study psychology for math. Like it's not a thing. They usually hate that that part of it. But it's important because it's science. And that class has the higher failing rate. And for me, that year, first year, it was the class that actually had the highest mark, which is 93%. That's like really high.
Wow.
And I remember one of my course mates, he was like, I wish I could like kind of be like you, or like stuff like that. And I'm like, okay, so all you need to do to get this good mark is listen back all lectures at least twice, um, if not 3 times. For each lecture, create notes, detailed notes. I had like at least 50 pages of notes, everything in detail, everything was just like organized. Meet the lecturer once or twice a week with questions that sometimes he will tell me, like, it's not going to be an exam. I'm like, yeah, but I want to understand. But you understand it so deeply that by the time you show up to the exam, it feels easy. But for that one exam, I spent at least 40 hours just preparing. Not talking about taking notes, just preparing, going through and just like kind of rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. That's all it was. Like that's all it was. There was nothing that made me more special or more knowledgeable, because I would just go through it so many times that I just couldn't not understand it. If there was something that I didn't understand,
Yeah.
I book a meeting, I go ask annoying questions to the teacher, and and also like I wasn't afraid to ask dumb questions. I was just asking questions about everything. And that's all it was. Like and the same thing that I tell people about self-development. So sometimes or quite often I hear people tell that, oh, you're like so like smart or like wise for your age and stuff like that.
Well, you are.
Well, appreciate it. And in my mind, I'm like, I don't know if there's anything more special than, which is to this, there's a linked story to another person, which if I don't get to that, remind me. For me, I would always feel like there's nothing special about it. So like, let's say, usually people who are like teenagers or like younger, they would go out every weekend, right? So what I would do instead, I would watch something self-development, or I'd work on myself. So if we imagine that's 4 hours, just one evening a week, let's say Friday, 4 hours that evening, over a year, that's 200 hours. So that's the
Yeah.
work that I would have put in myself instead of going out and
Right.
stuff like that. And that's a lot of time. That's one evening a week. If you now add 3 evenings, and maybe on
Yeah.
weekends it's more than like 4 hours, then you see how, and let's say if that just one evening, you now multiply it over 10 years, that's 2,000 hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's
You are
literally,
investing in
exactly.
yourself.
I wasn't aware of it. I was just like, what is wrong with me?
Right.
But if you look at it, it's literally just more repetition,
Right.
more kind of intentional work. Same
It's
thing with that
discipline,
exam.
it's
Yeah.
consistency, I mean,
Yeah,
there's
which here's the second part. So like for me, I would always be like, oh, there's nothing special about me. There's nothing special about me. And then I had a call with one coach, and he kind of called me out on that. And he was like, okay, I understand what you mean. But over those, let's say 10 years, you were the one who chose to do that work and to put in that time. So that in itself is something special.
Yep.
And I was like, I have never thought about it that way.
Yeah.
And that's actually interesting because, like, for me, the main reason why I keep telling that is because I don't want people to put titles on anybody who might, not just me, but anybody who might be seemingly ahead to them, myself including, with somebody else in certain areas, because then the moment they do that, by default, they say that's not possible for me. So now they kind of take that like passive step there.
It can also, they can look at it and it affects their self-esteem, is like, I how could I get there? I can't.
Yeah. And even if somebody is listening and they're like, oh my gosh, I have to do so many hours, like, let's say to get to my level, like, no, first of all, I had no coaches, no nothing. So that in itself, like, took me way longer than it would have if I had somebody who was guiding me, or like I allowed my ego to step aside, ask for help and receive help.
Yes, yes. We're here for each other.
Yeah, exactly. But it's something that I feel like we're just, a lot of times we can get this default to beat ourselves up or compare ourselves or stuff like that, but you are where you are supposed to be. So like for me, that's actually something that I was thinking about one day when I was on a walk, because like, and it was about me being out of shape. And I was like, I think it was like 1 or 2 years ago, I got to like my best shape, and I was like, why am I not able to stay there? Like, why am I back again? And I got this realization that I'm probably here because I still haven't learned something that I'm supposed to learn where I'm in this state. And one thing that I actually got from that is that I would still be in those old patterns where I would avoid meeting people. I would avoid going out or anything like that, where I was like, okay, maybe this is my chance to actually face some of the shame or fear about people judging me or rejecting me based on my own perceptions about myself, and actually face that and overcome that, because this might be the last time I can practice it being this way, because there's still a lesson that I might not have learned being in this state, or something that I haven't addressed or faced. And this is actually my opportunity to do that and to face that fear or whatever it would be. Which actually, like, few things that I wrote down that you talked about that might be, or like for you might be getting in your way to start to take those steps, because that's really where the change is starting, where you start to really, like, if we break it down to really simple, like, kind of analogy, if you want to be different person, you have to do different things. That's all it is. If you want to have different results, take different actions. That's it. But if we think about what is getting in our way to actually take those actions, because that's where so many of us get stuck, myself including. The things that I wrote down that we might kind of discuss each of those was shame, fear of failure, confidence, and maybe fear of failure goes hand in hand with validation.
Oh yeah.
Even like with shame, that is something that I even like relatively recently understood, how many of my decisions have been based, or more like not making decisions or avoiding making decisions, have been based around shame. I would literally make, or wouldn't make, so many decisions because of the shame.
Oh yeah.
So many.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Not taking action. Oh yeah. Shame was, I mean, really, shame is what kept my mouth shut. That's really what kept my mouth shut.
What is
'Cause I
something
knew,
that, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, because I just knew that if I opened up my mouth and said something, somebody was gonna make a fool out of me.
So what could be something that could help to overcome or face that shame?
You know, for me, it was a lot of different layers though, too. And that's a good question because so much of it is really realizing who you are, really who you are, and diving in deep. And, you know, my suggestion, one of the suggestions is really finding out who you are. See, I didn't know who I was either. I was who everybody told me I was, or I was who I needed to be in order to get acceptance by that person. So I had no idea who I was, right? And so that just kept feeding my shame because I was constantly having to evolve myself for everybody because that was what I thought would work to get everybody to like me. So you got to really get to know yourself. And for me, once I gave myself permission to actually investigate that, that was a big eye opener for me. And that is something that helped me to realize a lot of things about my life. But and it goes back to really diving deep into the childhood abuse and understanding really in your heart that the abuse wasn't your fault. Those are some of. What about you?
I think um
And see, this is coming from somebody who wasn't abused, right? So you're just talking about your story coming from just growing up and not living in childhood abuse or trauma.
yeah, well, I'm finding out that there probably was some kind of trauma because I was
I-
little grown up kid, really.
Well, and it's true. And I don't tell people that you were abused or that you had trauma, but I think
Yeah,
that everybody to some degree has some kind of trauma in their childhood. It's
yeah.
life,
But I probably didn't
unfortunately.
have what most people would identify as like trauma or
Correct. Yeah,
abuse. Definitely not.
the repeat trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of the things is probably, and this is still something that I'm more so uncomfortable with, um, is to feel the feelings
Oh
or allow
yeah.
yourself to feel the feelings.
Yeah,
Even like
that's a big
with,
one.
yeah, because that is something that with certain feelings, well, one was that one feeling that I didn't allow myself to feel or show or anything was anger. And that's like, I'm not at the anger yet. Like I'm not there yet. But with even like feelings like to some extent you're like feeling pain or you're feeling hurt.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be now that you walk around crying and all this kind of stuff. I mean, in society, like when you're by
Right.
yourself, like
Right. When you
go
have
like
your
that.
moments, you have your
Yeah.
moments.
But like allow yourself to have those moments and feel that
Yeah.
emotion and not try to stop it and just allow it to come out. And also with that, one thing that helps is to not make it mean anything. It's just emotion wanting to come out that you might have
Don't
suppressed years ago.
don't put a story to it.
Yeah. Like or don't listen to stories that come up as you're in that
Right.
emotion.
Right. Right. Because they're
Um
going to come up.
exactly. So that would be one thing for sure. But even before that, I think um one would be even to acknowledge that you have shame about something. Um because I think one thing that I would have myself is that I would try to convince myself that, or I wouldn't even like consider it because I didn't want to address it. I didn't want to admit that I had some shame because in my head I had to be the strong person. Like you can't have shame as a strong person. Like you have to be
Right.
confident, you have to be strong and all this kind of stuff. You can't have
Yeah.
any like shame and embarrassment. Like you can't have any like you can't have any negative emotions. So I think with that, even something that I have started to do now is that every day I find, even if it's like a few minutes, to just like sit with myself.
Mm-hmm.
Just sit
Mm-hmm.
with myself, do
Quiet.
nothing, and just be. That's it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Something might come up, something might not come up, but you just sit with yourself and you be. And and that's something that I think even, especially I think a lot of us we don't even we don't know how to feel feelings because we are so automatic to suppressing them and not feeling them.
Yeah, I was going to say, because that was one thing for me is at first I couldn't feel the emotions. Like I couldn't even, like they weren't, it felt like they weren't even there. They were there. They were just suppressed. And so you're right. You have to sit with yourself, and it might even start out feeling like anger, but there's always an underlying emotion underneath that. And it's
Yeah.
okay to feel the anger, but keep going because there's more to it. Anger is usually the surface emotion. It's the one that is easy to have compared to some of the others.
For me, anger is the opposite. It's really hard to have.
Is it? See, I can go to anger real quick,
It's
in a
and
flash.
that's the interesting thing because each of us we have different coping mechanisms. For me, anger is forbidden. I can't be angry. I'm not allowed to be angry. I'm a
Why?
peacemaker. I'm a peacemaker.
Wow.
That's my job. As a
Wow.
peacemaker, I
That's your
can't be angry.
story.
Exactly.
Whoa. Oh man. Because and the thing with anger, and I've studied it a little bit, and in my therapy as well, it's come up that it's really, especially for men, it's the go-to kind of emotion because I don't
Pain.
want to say it's safe, but it's the safest of them all. And
Yeah.
but if you think about it and you go deeper, there's pain, there's some kind of pain, there's something. And the way that we want to respond to it a lot of times is anger. Not you, but but I mean, and you're right. There are people that they don't go to anger.
Yeah, or
My
they feel
husband
that they
doesn't go to
can't go.
anger.
Like
Mm-mm.
one is that you don't go, but for me, for years, it was even like if I would get angry by default, I would get in like more so like crying mode. I would feel anger and then it just like switches towards victim. It's like it literally like anger wasn't allowed. I can't be angry. I can't be
Wow.
aggressive. I'm a peacemaker. Um, but one thing also with shame, um, definitely is that has helped me was to some extent curiosity.
Oh,
Because like
yeah.
one thing, like there's an example with that. Like when I would go to gym, I would be really kind of, and to some extent, I still feel that like kind of sense of shame to do squats because I was like, I
Yeah.
don't have the perfect form, you know. And I was like, everybody gonna see that I don't have all this kind of story, right?
Oh,
And
I know. I know that story personally. I
and
know
I would
exactly where
literally
you're going.
I would go to, and sometimes it would literally go as far as me even going to the gym. I would be like, I would have that anxiety or that like resistance to do that. And the main
Yeah.
reason was that because I would grow up with so many like insecurities and shame around like the way I looked, even though like looking back at pictures, I'm like, there's no reason for that. But still it was there.
Yeah.
Like I was convinced I was fat, even though like I was proper like skinny kid. I was like training many hours a day. Um, so like
Yeah.
looking back, I have no idea where it came from. Well, I do, but like visually, it
Yeah.
just doesn't make sense. Um,
Right.
yeah, and like it's so like with the gym, like sometimes I would feel that anxiety or like shame or embarrassment because like in gym, I'm like everybody's like I'm here to train, so everybody sees me. I'm like exposed,
Yep.
you know.
And they're all watching you, of course. They're
Yeah, they're
stopping what they're
looking at
doing and
they
watching
see
you.
everything that's wrong with my
Yep.
body. Um,
Yep.
and they're judging me.
Oh, yeah.
So like what and there's like something that a friend of mine said. So like one day I didn't do the squats and as I was walking home, I said to him that I didn't do them because I was kind of like anxious and stuff like that. And he's like, okay, so now instead of doing it, you're gonna think about it for the rest of your day.
So true.
And the next time I went to the gym, I actually did it because that thought for
Yep.
me was more powerful than facing it. But adding curiosity to that, um, one thing how we can approach it is because a lot of times with shame we get to these conclusions that this is impossible for me, I can't do it, or like everybody will do it, or all this kind of stuff. What if, not even what if, that's not curiosity yet. It's more so like, I wonder what will happen if I do this. And it doesn't have to be, let's say with the gym example. Instead of doing it at the gym where that's specific, let's say squat place is exposed, what if I found one where it's kind of in a corner
Mhm.
and I maybe went a bit earlier where there aren't that many people, but I still face that fear or shame. And I face it more so with curiosity. I wonder if what will happen if I do it. And even if I do it, what if I survive and I don't die? Like,
And nobody laughs at you and nobody makes fun
yeah,
of you.
nobody, even better, what if nobody even notices me?
Even better.
They just don't even notice me. Um, and kind of approaching it with curiosity.
Yeah.
Because one thing with shame is that a lot of times I feel like shame is making us to jump to conclusions. And if we approach
Oh,
something with
yeah.
curiosity, we're now a bit more open to whatever will be the consequences,
Mhm.
but there's a bit more of that openness and using that openness to do that action in that space, that could be something helpful.
That's huge though, and you and I talked about this months and months and months ago, that whole statement of replacing judgment with curiosity. And that, that's been a game changer for me because of my upbringing, because of everything I went through, I was judgmental. I was really hard on myself. And I had these unrealistic expectations of others that turned into judgment, right? And just switching that up.
Yeah.
And starting to apply that in every part of your life. I haven't quite done that yet because there's so many things I know I'm not aware of.
Same.
But just applying that and starting to apply that in places has been huge. It's liberating, literally. Like it really opens up the door because when I'm in judgment, I've got my eyes locked in on one thing and one thing only. That's it. My mind isn't open to anything else. I'm just focused
Yeah.
on that one thing. But when I have curiosity, I'm opening the door because I'm looking for something else. So I'm open to other things.
Yeah.
And that's been huge for me.
Yeah. And like, usually the way I describe curiosity versus judgment is that with curiosity, you're more like blank page. So you're just like
Mm.
gathering data, gathering information, and just
In your
like,
research mode.
yeah, you're just like researching. And you can see that a
Oh,
lot with
yeah.
kids. They're like, okay,
Yeah.
if I jump on this, like, what will happen? Well, let's go and
Yeah.
see.
Yeah.
And then with the judgment, it's more so like good, bad, right, wrong. So we go
Yes.
to these kind of polarities or jump to conclusions. And that's where, like, as long as we approach things with curiosity and don't jump to those conclusions of like this is good or bad, that can be really beneficial to even like start to take some actions or face some of those fears. And
Yeah,
last thing
really.
that I would add with shame is something that we already discussed, is to um, talk about it or share.
Get it
Um,
out. Get it out, whether it's vocal in a safe place or
and
even
it'll
writing
feel
it out.
so weird.
Mhm.
And
And
be
it's
okay with
hard.
it being weird. It will be weird
It will be
because
weird. And you might even say it with tears, and that's okay. Because I remember sharing stuff. I talked with my husband the other day about a situation we had one time, and it was a misunderstanding. It wasn't anything big. But as I brought it up with him, I started to cry. There's still shame there. And there was, and honestly, the way I won't share the story, but the way the story went, there should be no shame whatsoever for either one of us at all. And yet it's still there. And I looked at him as we're talking about it, I'm like, tears are coming to my eyes. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's still something there. So I'm diving deep into that one. I know why. I now know why it happened. I'm still working through it, but it's still there. I didn't even see it
yeah.
coming till I started to tell the story.
Mm. And actually, with this, another thing that I would want to add with shame is that don't expect not to have it.
Correct.
You like, I still
Yes.
have things where I'm like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
why did I,
Yeah.
like, I still have it and it still like comes up, or like you feel embarrassed, or like, oh, they're gonna catch me,
Yeah.
in my
Yeah.
act.
Yeah.
That's fine as well. Don't expect to complete, like, because I feel like the moment you have no shame or embarrassment at all, you kind of lose piece of you being a human. Like,
So
it's not
true.
something to get rid of. It's more so you can look at it as it might be educating you something on something that you could address or to explore or like start to overcome or face. But if we go into this with the expectation that, well, one thing is that the more you start to take those actions and you face some of the anxieties or like shame or just share it and stuff like that, it will actually start to um not even like it fully disappear, but it will have less power over you.
You'll
You
be
know,
able
like
to
it,
manage it. And that's where the
yeah,
curiosity would come in, because, I'm putting these two things together. And when you're feeling shame, be curious. Why am I feeling shame? Wait a minute. Hang on. What's going on? And you're going to get to the root of it if you keep asking yourself and you keep diving deep, because really, I know shame and guilt, people think they interchange. They really don't. To me, in my opinion, in my life, shame is not okay.
shame is
Guilt
the
is
lowest
okay.
and emotion.
Yeah, and guilt will motivate me as long as I keep it in balance. But shame to me is, we've
Paralyzing.
already talked. Yeah, it's paralyzing. So, when you're feeling that shame, stop and ask yourself, why am I feeling the shame? Especially, well, you should always ask it, but especially when it doesn't line up with with what's going on. It makes no sense. There's something rooted in you that is causing the shame to come up that shouldn't be.
Yeah. Or it's just there. Like it's I feel like sometimes I'm just like, I feel like sometimes we um even like with the should or shouldn't, that's another thing that we have this like, I shouldn't be feeling this way.
Right.
Well, maybe you should, maybe you shouldn't, but this is just the way you feel right now. Like it's just what it
That's
is.
judgment.
Yeah,
You're judging. I
exactly.
shouldn't
And
feel like this.
yeah, and it's like, well, you might, or maybe you shouldn't, but you do. So deal with it. Like, no,
You're right, right. Let's dive in
just
and
yeah,
figure out
like
what's going on.
just feel it. Don't
Mhm.
have, and also like not everything has to mean something. It's just, you know, like you might be
You don't have to
now
have a story with everything. That's so true.
exactly.
That's what I'm teaching. I'm working on that right now. Not everything has to have a story. It just doesn't. It
Yeah,
doesn't have meaning, because I have done that all my life. Everything had meaning. Everything had a story to it. And if it didn't have a story, I would create it. And some things just don't need a story.
yeah. Another one that I feel that would be super valuable for us to address is that like validation and to some
Yeah.
extent fear of failure. Um,
Yeah.
that we are seeking, because that's something that can a lot of times stop us from starting to take
Oh yeah.
those steps towards that change or
It
changing
kind of
that
lines up with the
story.
whole perfectionism kind of thing in there. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just think which one is, they're linked, but they're not fully linked. Which one do you feel is stronger, like fear of failure or like validation?
For me, validation was more important than the fear of failure. It could be different for other people, because I
Yeah.
was on a mission to be validated, right? That was
Mm.
my mission in life, was to be validated
Yeah,
and
well, maybe
loved.
we can start with validation then.
Validation, but yeah, fear of failure is huge too. And we just have to get a whole different thought process about failure, really. I mean, that's the bottom line with that. And we'll touch on that. But
And I think it's the same with validation.
yeah, I mean, validation for me, because I didn't get validation at home, I was constantly seeking validation, and I was constantly, and then with that comes people pleasing, um, and even up until not, I mean, I still see parts of my life where I'm looking for validation. I'm
Yeah, likewise.
definitely, because yeah, I'm looking, I'm aware of it. It certainly has come a long way, but, um, and what's interesting when I think about it, someone would finally give me some validation, and I would just be on a high because I finally got validation, but it didn't last.
My validation, because you know I was a peacemaker, helper, supporter.
You're right.
That was me like seeking for validation,
Right.
just trying to get more sense of worth through helping others and getting some
Right.
feedback that, "Whew, I'm good enough," you
Yeah.
know.
Finally,
Yeah,
finally.
And even then I'm
'Cause-
like, ah,
Because in my validation, not only was I looking for someone to love me or like me, but having a purpose to be here. Because linked in with the not being loved, it's like, well, why am I here? Because
actually, like,
I mean, I'm here for everybody to just kind of dump on.
as you were saying this, I was like, I actually didn't even look to be loved because I believed I'm unlovable. I didn't even look for it.
So you just had a purpose
I just had it as kind of
rather than
default assumption. But I think for me, it was like by default, like, okay, I'm not lovable, so maybe I can be liked,
ooh,
you know? If
yeah.
not love, maybe like. And
Or
and big,
needed, or even needed, because
I
needed
think
would mean
needed
that
was
you're
more
like,
so.
yeah,
Yeah,
and that I can see that, because that, yeah, I could totally see it, because
interesting.
I
Yeah,
did that too. Yeah, that is really interesting, because I did the same thing, because I think about it, because my mom got sick when I was so young and I had to take care of her, that I became a caregiver. And so I can see in my life where I constantly was trying to be a caregiver in people's lives, because then they would like me, because that's when my mom liked me,
yeah. Like if you're
after in
needed,
my
you're
teenage
liked.
years. Yeah, because my
Or
teenage
maybe
years,
it
she didn't
might
like
even
me.
be that like I can't be loved, I can't be liked, but I can't be needed.
Right. So there's something.
Yeah.
And so there's that little piece. That's why I'm
Oh my
here.
gosh.
That's why I'm here. I'm here to be
Yeah.
needed.
Or even like even not that, but for me, I think it was more so like, so that's how I can feel good about myself.
Yeah, because that feels good, because it's some form of
Yeah.
acceptance.
And it gives you some sense of worthiness.
Right.
Because I didn't
Right.
have any sense of worthiness. Like,
Right.
um,
Right.
and
Me
like
either.
if I would help somebody, they would like thank me, or I would get some kind of validation from that. I was like, also I have some worth, you
Right.
know?
And
And
so
then you would
that's what I'm
want to be
supposed to
needed.
do. Right.
Yeah.
So I'm going to keep going down that road of being a helper and being needy and being what they want me to be, so that I can get
Yeah.
that
And then you get
some kind
miserable,
of
you
acceptance.
resent everybody.
Oh yeah, and you're
But you can't
miserable.
not do it because it's the only
Right.
way to get any kind of like validation or feeling like you belong, or you know, any of that, those like emotions. And it's just like all of this, anybody listening, it's a good example of where the stories can take us.
Yeah. And how we
Yes.
can have how we can even twist these stories so that they confirm the
Yep.
beliefs that aren't true.
Yeah.
Really.
Because a lot of these stories for me, they are not really true anymore.
No, not at
But
all.
there was a time.
It was a part of me. It was who I was. When I think about it, like, I was given an example one time of how angry I used to get and how I don't get that way. And the only way I could explain how that anger used to hit me is it would completely fill me.
Mm.
I completely was angry. It felt like every space in me was mad. And I would go from being completely calm like I am now to something happening to me just being full on anger. And I had a situation happen, it's like a year ago, where normally it would have triggered me into that place. And I haven't been to that place in a very long time, but it was something that I recognized that, whoa, back in the day, the situation made me angry, but it was only for a minute. It was only for a short time, and it was justified anger, but it just
Yeah.
lasted for a few minutes, and then it did not consume me. That's what I noticed right away. That was interesting. I think that's what caught my attention. Is I got angry and I felt it.
I was about to ask if
But
you allowed yourself to feel it.
I did, and it was justified, and I got it out of my mouth, and I said what I needed to say, within reason, not being
Yeah.
mean or anything. But I sat back and I went, and then I calmed right down. Where before it would have, like I said, it felt like it completely consumed me, and it was a part of me, like your friend said to you, where you thought about it all the time.
Yep.
And I would be angry, and I would rehash it in my head, and I would just be angry for who knows days, right, over this thing. And it completely consumed me, and you could imagine how bad it derailed me. And so that realization was huge.
Yeah. And one thing that I can add about validation, and I wanted to sink in for people, is that the only person that you're looking for validation from is actually yourself.
That is so true. So 100%
And you
true.
might even want to ask yourself, what is it that I feel that I need to validate to myself about myself that I haven't yet? And maybe identify some of the reasons why you haven't validated or something that's getting in the way. Because as much as we're trying to seek validation from others, usually it all comes back to validating ourselves.
We don't validate ourselves. And I'll tell you that having a relationship with myself and learning to have a relationship with myself is probably the biggest thing that helped heal that part of me. Do I still seek validation at times? Yes, I do.
Yeah.
We're human, but it's not my motivating force anymore, which it was. It was my motivating force, and it's not there anymore. And learning about me and liking myself and having a relationship and validating myself, you're right, has been huge. And I don't seek that validation like I used, nothing like I used to.
What were some of the things that you started to do, even like with like dating yourself or something like that, where I can imagine that some people listening, they're like, ugh, like that in itself might feel like,
A
I
relationship
don't
with
know.
yourself, like weird.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It does sound weird.
Because then
Um,
you have to get to know yourself.
yep.
And that's scary.
Mm-hmm. So what's your question?
What could help? Let's say somebody listening, they might identify that it's something that I would want to do or start to maybe like build or work on that relationship with themselves. What would be some of the things that they could start doing or some steps that they could take, especially assuming that they might have strong resistance even towards the idea of that? Because a lot of us, we are really good at rejecting ourselves
Oh
or
yeah.
putting ourselves down. So, assuming it's somebody like that who might even identify that all I do is just see the bad and I beat myself up and all this kind of stuff, what could be something that could help them initially? Especially like I assume that it might just feel quite triggering even to kind of explore that. Liking myself, loving myself. Ugh.
Okay, well then let's start with just getting to know yourself, right? Because you don't fall in love with someone and then get to know them. I mean, that's not the proper way to do it, right? You get to know them, and that's what causes you to fall in love with them or like them, really. And so really kind of getting to know yourself. And that was
And not
really
only
foreign
the
to me.
bad stuff.
Yeah, no, yeah, I know the good stuff for sure, because I remember when I started that journey of discovering myself, and that it just seemed so foreign. I didn't even know where to start. And so I just started kind of, I don't know, looking at different things. How did I do it? Because it was a while ago too. But I just started asking myself, what is it I like?
Curiosity.
It really was curiosity. And one of the things I've said in my podcast before, one of the things that I really didn't realize I like so much is history. I love it. But when I think back to when I was in high school and stuff, I did enjoy history. I just didn't apply myself. But I
Mm.
did enjoy it, but I didn't realize I liked it then, right? It was just a school, right? Um, but just started the curiosity. What do I like? And then I would try stuff. Oh, I really don't like that, which helped me to figure out what I do like. You just have to try. And it is those little steps. So, maybe you have a curiosity about dancing. And maybe I don't know. You know what? And I'll say this about my son. I hope he doesn't shoot me. But um he I talked to him about dancing when he was in high school, and he was not interested at all. He didn't go to the dances, he wasn't interested. But after he finished college, he thought he wanted to stretch himself. So he went and took dancing lessons. And you know what? He's actually a really good dancer.
Mm.
He's a really good dancer. So I just started trying stuff. And at first I did it quietly without telling anyone, because, oh, what if I went and tried it and then failed? Right?
Yeah.
Don't want anybody to know that. So I did them by myself, and I didn't let people know. And then after a while, as I started discovering stuff that I liked, it actually built my confidence, and it made it easier to try new things. And when I did fail, it wasn't the end of the world. And I started sharing my failures. And people were like, oh, that's kind of, I expected them to make fun of me, right? And instead they're like,
But
wow, you
yeah,
did? You tried that?
and it's even like not sharing the failures, it's just things that you tried, really.
Right. Right.
Because
Because at
that's
first
kind
I
of
wouldn't
the
tell people at all.
yeah. Oh yeah, because like a lot of shame, you know.
Right.
And I think that's something even like with the failure itself. You don't really fail, you just had like an attempt,
You tried it.
unsuccessful
You
attempt.
tried it.
Yeah.
And I talked about this on the podcast before. So Sarah Blakely is the founder of Spanx, right?
Mhm.
Well, she sold it, but she's the founder. And I love that she shared this. And I shared this with my son, and I said, I wish I would have done this with you growing up. But her family would sit around the table, dinner time, and her dad would ask each kid, hey, what'd you fail at today? And would actually be upset when they didn't fail, because that means they didn't try. And I've gotten to the point now too. There's going to be people out there that will want to make fun of you or whatever, but those aren't the people that are in your life that matter. Those aren't the people that really truly matter. Because people that really truly matter in your life and that love you are not going to make fun at you.
Including yourself.
Correct. Correct. And if you think that you're going to be perfect the first time you do stuff, you're not. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier. You can sit and read a book about how to drive a car, but until you actually get in the car and drive it. And when you first got in the car and drove it, were you perfect? No.
Yeah. And like another thing that I wanted to add, before we probably start to close off.
Wind this down.
Yeah. Now I forgot it.
Oh no.
Oh yeah, I know. Even with kind of understanding yourself and what is it that you would pretty much like get to know yourself. Sometimes things that we look at others and we envy,
Mm.
it might actually be something that you deep down want, or you want to try
So
it or explore it.
true. That is so true. And it's funny you say that, because I can remember that very thing where I look at someone and be envious of what they want. And then the second thought is, well, that will never happen to me. I really want it, but that'll never happen to me. And you know what? I'm now living it. And it blows my mind. When I think back on some of those situations, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm living that life that I didn't think I would.
Yeah. Or you would point fingers and even like hate,
Right.
or because
Yeah.
sometimes things that we either like envy or we are jealous of, it might be something that we want to have a bit more of within ourselves or in our lives. So that also can be something that can help you to identify some things to try out, or something like that.
Be curious about, right? When those emotions are coming up, and even that one, why am I feeling like this way about this person? Why do I feel that way?
Yeah, definitely.
What's going on?
Oh my gosh, this is like so good.
I know, it really is.
Anything you want to
I know, because
add?
I can see it's both coming up with realizations
And
ourselves
it's like,
still.
interesting.
Yeah,
Which is
making
an
me
example
think.
for anybody listening. The journey is never over.
We're still on our journey.
Yeah.
Until we take our last breath.
Exactly. Like, and also don't expect for it to be over. There is no one point
You
when
don't
you're like,
arrive.
oh, I'm entitled, everything is perfect, and I know myself fully. Because even if you think you know yourself fully, there's probably another thing that you can explore, you can try, you can kind of learn about yourself. And the world is full of things that you can try out and do to kind of explore, get to know yourself more, get to know yourself deeper. As long as you're curious, as long as you're willing to face some of the fears or some of the resistance to go and take some of the steps to do that exploration outside of just sitting and thinking about it, which is good beginning, but that's all it is, beginning.
Yeah, yeah.
That the key is really to go out there and do take risks. And even as you will share them, you will start to see that even if you fail, you might still inspire somebody next to you to go and take risk for themselves. Maybe even especially because you failed, because then they're like, you went, you did it, and you failed. Maybe I can do the same and deal with that, even if I fail, because like,
Yeah.
like you don't have to be perfect to be a good role model or like inspire others also or inspire change for them, because neither of us are perfect.
No, and failing doesn't make you a failure.
Yeah, exactly.
It just means that again, when you fail, if that's what you want to call it, it gives you the opportunity to look at it and learn. Okay, so that didn't work. What could I do
Yeah, you
different?
learned
Could
one
I?
more thing that didn't work, or one more
Right,
approach that didn't work.
right,
Yeah.
right. So let me try a different way.
Yeah. So people keep going out and trying.
And give yourself a lot of grace.
Yeah.
I mean, just give yourself a lot of grace. It's so easy to be so hard on ourselves.
Yeah.
And the whole, I should have known, I was supposed to know, I should have done it.
Stories.
The
About
should
your
haves.
stories. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right,
Yeah.
Tara. Anything you want to add?
Well, I was just going to finish it by saying, just be really easy on yourself and give yourself a lot of grace. Be good to yourself. Treat yourself the way you want to be treated.
And have fun.
Have fun, laugh, cry. It's okay.
Yeah.
Life
If
is
you
full
fail
of
at something,
experiences and emotions.
laugh about it. Like it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah. No, it's not life or death.
Yeah.